Hey, everyone. Welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Ann Ganguza, and today I am super excited to bring special guest Sean Savage to the show. Thank you, Sean, for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
Absolutely. Bosses out there, I wanted to introduce you to this very special guest because Sean has over 20 plus years as a musician, 10 plus years in radio, and is currently a technical producer for a Toronto commercial radio station. And his experience thus far has landed him a couple of super popular podcasts that are out there, which are also, I believe, syndicated. You can talk a little bit about that later on. And I met Sean during a clubhouse show that we were doing, and Sean was busy helping everyone with their audio. So I love talking quality audio and all about your experience, Sean. So thanks again for joining us. And I'm super excited to talk to you about lots of things today.
So am I. And it's really a joy to be on here. And it's funny, as I was thinking about coming on here, realizing again how we did meet and how things have blossomed as far as working together and collaborating. And I'm excited for that. We can talk about that a bit later. But it's funny, and I don't know if you know this, Sam, but in connecting with you and interacting with you and realizing I'm on the radio and I do speak in front of people and I speak on the radio, I thought I was kind of there. And in interacting and being in your space, I realized I'm pretty good, but I still got work to do. And I thank you for that. Without you even knowing it,
Wow.
You've made me go back and tweak the craft for me.
Oh, I love that. Wow. Well, I find your career fascinating. And I always love bosses. I always encourage my bosses to go out there and, look at these kind of parallel, adjacent industries so that we can better serve our clients as bosses and grow our businesses. And so your experience that you had, not only audio wise, but just in your podcast experience, something that was outside of voiceover, really, really excited me to talk to you today about how you can achieve success, not just in voiceover in your podcast, but in marketing that podcast, getting a podcast that resonates with people. And, what are the techniques that you utilize to do that? I mean, because your podcast, I think it was your first one, it was the chakra healing. I'm not sure what it was called.
Chakra healing and brainwave sync.
There you go. And you
everywhere.
literally had a series of audio in the podcast, and it went viral. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the story, it's a fascinating story, and it sort of blossomed from my experience teaching in college. I taught recording arts for 10 years here in Toronto at a college. I actually created the program, so that was interesting as well. And getting more spiritual is something, and I've been very spiritual and on that journey for quite a while, but I haven't shared it with anybody. And it was always this private thing, as we're going to lean into authenticity. It was something, it's funny, people had a name for me. They would call me Sean Serious. I found that out. Not to my face, obviously.
Yeah.
And it was a thing. You're in the music industry. I'm an artist. I want to protect myself, me, and going out into the big bad world. And back to authenticity, growing up, for those who are watching the video, you can see I'm a brown person and I'm mixed race, though. So that was definitely an issue growing up. And I would always lean to the non-brown side, just for societal pressures, bullying, fitting in school, that sort of thing. And as I got older, realizing it really came to pass with my mom, because when I was growing up, she would be cooking all this really cool Indian food. I'm like, I want a Big Mac. Because that's what everyone else ate, right? So now I'm older, I'm like leaning into the other side and then asking her for recipes and that sort of thing, and blooming into the spiritual side. And because I'm a nerd for audio, I love audio and it's what I do. I would lean into this and go to these people with the singing bowls and the chakras and spinning, and I would go and it would be psychosomatic. They'd be like, okay, this is working on this one. And I'd be like, no, not so much, not for me. You're telling me it's this chakra. I'm not feeling anything. And I went, you know what? Let me figure this out, because I'm a nerd for science and audio. And I happen to have a friend of mine who's even a bigger nerd as far as tradition in Hinduism and Bhagavad Gita and all that stuff. And he actually reads and writes Sanskrit. So I was fascinated by this. And I told him my problem with these people and their chakra healing and not working on me. He goes, okay, let's go into this. So for a year, we went back to all the Vedas, like hardcore, because he could read and write it. And we found they'd figured this stuff out a long time ago. So we got the actual specific tones and frequencies for every chakra, because all these other ones were the wrong ones. And once I figured out what these actual ones were, I started testing them. And then I did feel where it was supposed to be. And I had friends test it out, so I wasn't just creating it out of my own mind. And then I said, okay, well, as some of you may know, the listeners and the viewers, the way a podcast works, you have your RSS feed, you put up a show, and then you do a show every week, and people come back and they go, hey, let's listen to what you're doing. But because of my teaching background, I went, what if we flip the format on its head here? What if I create these frequencies for every chakra, and I actually implemented Gitas, which are different types of music from the Indian tradition as well, for meditation, that sort of thing. What if I just use the podcast format to deliver them, as opposed to updating them all the time?
Download my
right.
my audio.
So then I heard intuitively, I was going to monetize all this. Intuitively, I just heard, a voice put it needs to be out in the world for free. So I created the podcast. I got all the tones for every chakra, plus I added Om and some other ones. And these are one and done. And I just put them out there. No advertising, didn't tell anybody, nothing, man. And people slowly started discovering it, because you can go there and you just, hey, I want to work on this chakra.
Sure.
You hit the play button and you hear it, and it works on that one, and you feel it right away. And to your question now about how to get it, so the result is we're currently getting 50,000 people a day listening to this and
That's
using
incredible.
them. And I released that in 2014, 2013, and it's ranking. We're on 21 charts in Apple. We're always in the top 10 everywhere. And the key for me, and this will be different for everyone because every podcast is different, but the key for me is I was on Facebook randomly, and I was in the spiritual room. I'm thinking Clubhouse. So I'm in this group, and there was a post there, and I just randomly said, well, here's a link to this podcast. Maybe it'll help, because they were talking about chakras and that sort of thing. And like I said, I did no advertising on this. And the next day, I had 10x listeners on that podcast. And I went, what did I just do? I was just in a Facebook group. But you know what, Ann? I clicked on that group, and I looked, and there was 800,000 members in that group. So even if I got 10% of that.
Yeah.
And then it accelerated. So there's point number one. Don't sleep on Facebook, folks. And point number two with your podcast. The key for me for that one to the success, besides Facebook, was finding the right category to put my podcast into. And hopefully the host you're using, whoever you are listening, lets you do this, because some don't. But there's 3 categories you can put it into, and you can rank the order. And I tweaked the categories. I changed the order until it kind of hit. And then the apps and everything do the work for you. So don't sleep on Facebook. And for your podcast, maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's one of these other
Sure.
legacy social media. So try them all out and then find the right category. So for that particular podcast, it's still going because I found the right category and I found the right social media for where the
Right.
people were receptive.
And that has a finite number of episodes? I mean, unless there's new chakras being discovered.
Well, that's the thing. There was a finite number of episodes, and then I
Right.
did a second season, and I added more meditation music, ragas.
Got it.
And I will be doing a third season where I'm just going to be adding more music for meditation. But you're right. It was a one and done 13, and then I
Sure.
just added some more music, and people are loving it. But again, find the right social media that resonates and find the right category, and you can experiment with that. Some people are afraid of changing categories while the podcast has been launched, but it doesn't affect your audience at all. But it tells the apps and the algorithms to push it out into different audiences when you change your categories.
I love that. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about your music career, because that's a creative industry, and Boss's voiceover is a creative industry. How is it? First of all, it's tough to make a living, and so how over the years have you evolved into finding? Well, I'm assuming, because I find joy in my creative industry, that you find joy, but also how have you been able to keep it up so that you can pay the bills, so to speak, in terms of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, producing music or playing music. I think you mentioned that you started earlier. You mentioned that you started as a DJ. So how did that musical career evolve over the years?
That's a great question. And, we all have parents who love us and want us to have traditional jobs because it comes from a good place. And they want security for their children, financial and otherwise. And the arts is not the way to do that. And it's funny because I remember, being 12 or 13 with a little Walkman, listening to the radio and recording songs and being fascinated with hearing music on the radio. And that was just a passion. And that led to me being a mobile DJ and actually doing weddings and doing weird locations. I actually did a wedding in a curling rink, which here in Canada is a unique thing.
Yeah.
And that was interesting to say the least. And it was always a hobby. And the goal was traditional, in my case, law. Go to school, go do this, go do law school.
So you went to law school?
I did. I started. Absolutely. I went through that whole path. And the whole time listening to music, loving the radio, doing that. And I figured I'd start DJing. The goal was to do nightclubs and do that. And after a while, I actually did end up being in nightclubs and doing that. And the passion just got even more and more fueled. The embers were there. It was a nice, warm little fire, but it just kept going and going and going. And that's because I recognized that I authentically loved how it made me feel, and I would feel. And then I would take a vacation from my humanness and then go to school and read books and argue with people and learn statutes and all the complete opposite of what lit me up, which was music. And after a while, I just took a year off of law school. I went to production school, and then the DJing just picked up. And at that time, it was still a passion project, but I figured I got to go all in, because if I just dip my toe in, I'll have dipped my toe in success. But if I want all in success, I have to commit to this. And again, that wasn't received very well with the parents and that, but I made a deal. I said, I'll take a year off. I got to do this for a year. If not, I'll go back and finish up law school. And luckily, what happens is you can take a year off and still go back, and I didn't lose anything. And it was interesting it just kept going and going. And to your question now about how to maintain that or how to make money, make a living at that, I remember making a conscious effort to not be the person on stage, to not be in the forefront for that very reason, where I could compromise and go, I'm still in music. I'm not on the front lines. I'm not the artist. The camera isn't on me, but I'm still creating it. So I'm in the background. I'm technical. I'm doing the music. I'm figuring things out. And then I went to engineering school, audio engineering school. And then that was the design was looking around. I'm like, artists come and go, right? You know, you have a one-hit wonder, blah, blah, blah. But then the people in the background are still there. And they have careers. So it was a definite switch to go, I want to be a background person. So then I learned how to make it, the music, be in the studio, do all the technical things, recording. And that is one thing that helped me. Here's the problem, and you find this all the time too, especially in the record labels. It's full of failed artists. All the people who wanted to be an artist and then ended up being in the background. But for me, it was a conscious effort. And the other thing too, as far as longevity, is to learn. I know it's a favorite word of everyone now, but you got to learn how to pivot.
Yeah,
and
right?
not just when you are moving couches around tight corners and stairs, right?
Like Friends.
Like I'm hearing Ross in my head.
Like Ross in the background. Pivot.
But you have to know that things are never going to always stay the same. And you have to be adaptable. And as far as any art, authenticity is number one.
Yeah.
Because for me, art is expressing who you are. But if you don't know who you are, how are you going to express yourself?
Yeah.
So you need to know who you are.
That's a wonderful point. And I do want to, because you're so humble. I do want to bring this, this point out. I mean, you don't just work in the background of music, Sean. I mean, you're amazing at what you do. I mean, you've worked with some amazing artists, over the years. And I want the bosses to know that, I'm talking practically with, I would say, Canadian music royalty here. But yeah, you've worked with some major artists. Helping behind the scenes and producing audio and mixing audio. It's incredible your resume that I had to pull out of you.
Yeah.
But really, you didn't just make a conscious effort to say, let me go in the background and learn how to audio engineer music. You went 1,000% so that you could be the best. At it. And so, obviously that is just, trailed you throughout your career here, because there are so many people I know. When you were in Clubhouse, every time I turned around, I could barely get your attention because you were helping somebody else with their audio.
And as far as being an artist, same thing for voiceover artists, artists in general, it was definitely a learning curve, because you aspire to be the best at something. I aspired to win Grammys and Junos, which is the equivalent here in Canada, and just make all this money and do all this stuff. And and this is personally for me, when I aspired to do all that, thinking about it took a lot of brain power and time away from doing it. And imagination is just a double-edged sword if you're creative, because you need it to create, but if it goes out of control, it takes over you creating, and you just think and imagine. And sometimes, well, all the time, thinking and imagining a result is way easier and quicker than actually
than
doing the
it.
work to achieve it.
Yeah.
And I did suffer from that. And it was very ego-based. And you mentioned me being humble and not pushing out my accolades. And a lot of people lead with that stuff. They're like, oh, yeah.
I had to pull it out of you.
Right.
Literally, right before this interview, I had to pull it out of him.
And what I learned from that is I used to lead with that stuff. And it came from insecurity. And I have to prove to you I'm good. Or I did all this stuff, therefore. And any creative will quickly realize other creatives, that's kryptonite. They run the other way when they see that, because it's an indication of ego and not authenticity, which is where good art comes from. Not that you can judge art, right? Because it's expression.
Sure.
And for me, there was a bunch of different times where and the universe just went, hey, check yourself, buddy. And it happened a bunch of times to the point where I had to listen. And I'm so grateful these incidents happened, because it did humble me. But then I realized, working with all these big artists, and again, I was talking to somebody the other day, I'm like, Forrest Gump ain't got nothing on me with all the crap, all the weird things that have happened in my life. And literally comparing it to that Forrest Gump movie where I just dropped some names and people are like, what? And these things, it's like a movie. But those things happened when
credits.
I wasn't looking for achievement. I was just trying to be the best me, whatever that was.
I love that.
And then going through, and when you talk about being humble, it's probably a Canadian thing too. But other than that, it's about, I know how good I am. And this will happen to all voiceover artists, all artists in general, where you get to a point where you've proved it to yourself.
Ah, yes. I love that.
So I don't have to prove it to anyone else. And that's the kiss of death for me. It zaps on my creativity when all my energy goes into, but, no. It's my energy. I learned how to be selfish with it. And the biggest stars, again, I can roll off all the people I've been in the studio with. And the biggest ones are like that. There's no ego there. And if you connect with them and there is ego, they run the other way too. The biggest stars you can imagine, they're all the nicest people. And that was a lesson for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
You keep bringing up authenticity, and I bring up authenticity a lot when, we're talking about, voiceover, acting performance. I really, truly believe that authenticity is what keeps people listening to this podcast, because we're talking authentically, and you just honestly, you just dropped a few amazing pieces of wisdom here. I feel like we can all go home now, because that whole thing with the ego, right? All the nicest people are usually the ones that they understand how good they are, and they don't feel the need to front their credits. And I'm not, I'm not saying that you don't ever, lead off with, here are some of my credits, because sometimes you got to get the attention of people, and sometimes that does help. But I feel like if that is your full focus, right, to impress people with the work that you've done, I think that your work really needs to speak for itself, and that work needs to be rooted in authenticity.
Well, I think it's contextual too. So if you are, let's say you're in an audition and someone's like, what do you have to offer? What's your experience? What have you done? Okay. Blah, 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 blah. This is all the stuff I've done. Oh, okay. And then you move it aside, and then it's two humans connecting. So for me, it's definitely a little bit of both, where somebody will hear something I worked on, they'll do some research, like, who made that? Who mixed that? Who mastered? Oh, okay. And then they connect with me, and then I work with them and I work on their music. Or if there's a label that putting out a pitch or something, and they're like, okay, we need this type of person to work with this artist, then they're going to want to know, okay, can I trust this person? Will they come in on time? Will they come in on budget? Will they deliver? Have they done this before? Then it's like, okay, here's all the projects I've worked on and delivered contextually. And then they connect you. But then I connect with the artist in the studio. I'm not bringing that up. That's contextually, that got me in the door. But now what do you got?
Right, exactly.
So it's definitely has merit. But like you said, it shouldn't And for me, it shouldn't take up all my energy, and it serves a purpose, and then you move on.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, talking about authenticity and authenticity in your podcast. I mean, what I love is the first podcast that you brought out with the chakra sounds. You know, you had a thought, well, I might be able to monetize this, but then you decided, no, this needs to be out there. And I think, good karma comes around.
Absolutely.
Because, it goes around, comes around. And I think that probably just your intention with that, to be able to help and to be able to, provide a service for people that they can access all the time. I think it's a beautiful thing. And you've also got another podcast called Suddenly Spiritual, where you're documenting your spiritual journey. And I think in that you are talking with another a guest about your journeys, spiritual journeys. And there's a lot that gets discussed in that podcast. I mean, I've listened to quite a few episodes, and you really get down to the raw reality of, here's how I feel, here's what happened. And I really applaud and appreciate the authenticity in those episodes. And it helps me, for my own podcast and my own journey and my own artistry. It helps me to hear other artists being authentic, because that's what draws us together as humans.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because in the birthing of that podcast, like I mentioned earlier, in jest, but I'm known, like I said, people have a name for me, Sean Sirius. So there's this person they know is Sean Savage, that conducts himself in a certain way and does certain things. And I purposely hid the spirituality out of fear, out of insecurity. And as I'm getting older and knowing who I am and really, really leaning into that, being an introvert primarily, I mean, introvert and extrovert, because people always tilt their head when they go, you're an introvert? But you're on stage, you're on the radio.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I got to recharge after. And knowing that and knowing who I am, now sharing that spirituality, or sharing, and it's not like I figured it out. Here's the key thing. And I learned this from working on other people's podcasts as well, and learning how to tell a good story, is that a great story is a great story. But the reason it's a great story is because it forces the listener, so it's not a lecture, but it forces the listener to reflect on their life.
Yes.
So when I realized, okay, if I just speak about things I'm thinking about. So the fun thing with my co-host on that podcast is she is definitely tapped into spirituality, but her background is psychotherapy. She has clients, she helps people. So she will always bring sort of a framework to everything. And my function on that show is the audience. I'm an audience member. So we'll talk about a concept, and then I'll just say, yeah, well, this is how I figured that thing out, or I'm still figuring it out, or you know what, I don't agree with you. Why is this way and not that way? And I'm trying to figure it out and sharing me
The
figuring
journey.
it out.
Yeah, you're sharing the journey.
And that helps the listener, as you mentioned, to go, oh, okay. So he's going through that. I just kind of went through that. Hey.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that kind of brings me to another revelation, exciting kind of announcement, where you and I will be working together on a podcast. And I'm very excited to launch that in 2025. And this episode may not air until until right before that.
Mm.
But, speaking about authenticity and the journey and how difficult it is in today's digital age, where you've got media, all types of media, like social media, digital technology, synthetic AI voices, all of this information, like kind of coming at you from all different directions. And how can you be your most authentic self? And how can you evolve throughout, not just your voiceover career, but just how can you just evolve through life with all of these chaotic things that are thrown in your way? And how can you create the life that you want? And something that continues to bring you joy, because I think you and I have that very similar base where I try to do everything that brings me joy. And if I can make money at it, that's great, because I do have to pay the bills. But I think discovering that journey and going along that journey and talking about talking about how we got there and how we might have pivoted or evolved, I think can hopefully be helpful to others.
And the name of the podcast is called The Myth of You.
Yes, The Myth of You.
These myths are created in society. We kind of buy into them, and not by choice. They're created for us as well. And when you think about a myth, once you punch through, first accept that it's a myth. Maybe it's not true, or it influenced you in a different way. Myths are things that can define you. They'll influence how you behave. And, this comes from ancient storytelling. There's modern myths as well. And they play a role and they shape who you are.
Yes.
And if you understand those myths, understand maybe that you didn't choose to believe them, and that you can gain insight into you if you just, I'm thinking Mythbusters, but you bust the myth.
Exactly. Challenge the myth.
When you talk about the word myth, it's based on stories. And in short, you can rewrite the story of your life. And what you and I are going to be talking about,
according to your truth.
Absolutely.
Yep.
What you and I are going to be talking about is our stories and myths, common myths that you and I had to break through. And there's a framework there, and maybe some strategies that helped you and I that can help the listener to rewrite the story of their lives and the myth of you, figuring out what that is.
Yeah. I am so very excited for that, and that is coming up, guys. So keep a watch out for the Myth of You podcast coming your way in 2025. And Sean, I want to say thank you so much. I feel like we could have 5 more podcasts talking. But actually, we will be talking in our new podcast together. So I really appreciate you stopping by and sharing a part of your personal journey and sharing your bossness with the rest of the listeners here. And I can't wait for our podcast to launch.
I can't wait to have the world hear what we're talking about. And I want to thank you, Anne, for all the work that you do to help people be better at this thing. And I'll wrap up here, but it's something that's always in the music industry, and people ask me the same thing, and I could sense it too in your industry too, where it's sort of, don't steal that job from me.
Yeah,
I'm not going to share the secrets. I'm not going to share the wisdom. And the fact that I and you realize the same thing, where there's enough for everybody. We want to just bring everybody up and make everyone better. And I applaud you for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sean, and you as well. All right, bosses, I'm going to give a great big shout out to our sponsor, IPDTL. You too can connect and network like bosses. Find out more at ipdtl.com. Bosses, have an amazing week. Sean, thanks again, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye.